I came home to a moving truck and found my family trying to move into my house without permission. So I called the police, pressed charges, and permanently secured my property from them. The deputy had his hand on my shoulder and was asking me to breathe. I remember thinking that was strange that a stranger in a uniform was telling me to breathe in my own living room in front of my own fireplace while my mother stood 20 feet away on my front porch screaming that I was destroying this family. "Ma'am," Deputy Hartman said carefully, "I need you to stay calm so I can help you." I nodded. I breathed. And somewhere in the space between one exhale and the next, something inside me shifted permanently, like a gear that clicks into place and never goes back. Spent 31 years being the one who caved, the one who apologized first, the one who smiled through it and told herself this was just how families worked. Not anymore, not in my house. Let me back up because you need to understand what kind of person I was before Saturday, September 14th, so you can understand what kind of person I became after it. I grew up in a small house in Pueblo, Colorado, third of 4 kids. Except we were really 3 kids and then Lydia. Lydia was the baby by 9 years, which meant she existed in a different family than the rest of us. The family where mom had finally run out of patience for consequences. By the time Lydia was in middle school, our parents had stopped being parents and started being fans. She dropped out of community college twice. She had Owen at 22 with a man who left before the due date. She had Piper 2 years later with a different man, different story, same ending. I loved my niece and nephew. I want to say that clearly. Owen was 7 and obsessed with dinosaurs in a way that felt almost spiritual. Piper was 5 and would put her hand in yours without asking, like she just assumed you wanted to hold it. They were not the problem. They were never the problem. The problem was that my family had spent 30 years treating my competence like a community resource. I was the one who got a scholarship, the one who finished her degree in civil engineering, the one who paid off her student loans by 28 and started a retirement account at 26 and drove a used Subaru Forester because I understood that the math of wealth is quiet and slow and entirely unimpressive to look at. I rented an apartment in Denver for 5 years while I saved. I did not go to Cabo. I did not buy things I didn't need. I brought lunch. In 2021, I bought the cabin, 11 acres in the foothills outside Nederland, Colorado, 45 minutes from my office in Boulder, a creek that ran along the eastern property line and froze every January into something that looked like sculpture. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a wood-burning fireplace, and a wraparound porch where I could drink coffee and hear nothing. Nothing for the first time in my life. It cost $487,000. I put down $97,000. My name and only my name went on the deed. My parents gave me $1,000 as a housewarming gift. I bought a couch with it. Mom asked me to save the receipt in case they ever needed it back. I should have understood everything right then. I didn't. Flags came slowly the way they always do. It started 8 months ago in January. Lydia had been renting a 2-bedroom in Colorado Springs with the kids, but she called me crying one Thursday night saying her landlord was raising her rent by $600 a month and she couldn't afford it. "You have this space," she said. It wasn't even a question. "I work from home 2 days a week," I told her. "I need the quiet. I need my space. It would just be temporary. Everything with you is temporary, Lydia." There was silence, then the sound of sniffling, and then she hung up. My mother called 20 minutes later. My mother did not lead with hello. "Your sister is going to be on the street," she said, with 2 babies. "She makes $38,000 a year and pays $1,100 in rent," I said. "There are other options. Easy for you to say with your big house. My house I paid for." "Family property," my mother said quietly, almost to herself, and then changed the subject. And I filed it away in the part of my brain where I put things I didn't want to look at. That phrase, family property. I should have treated it like a declaration of war because that's exactly what it was. In February, they started driving up on weekends, the whole crew. Mom, Dad, Lydia, the kids. Just visiting, they said. Just spending time together. They would arrive on Friday evening and leave Sunday afternoon. And the first 3 or 4 times I told myself it was fine. It was even nice sometimes watching Owen hunt for fossils along the creek. But then I started noticing things. They were looking at rooms too carefully. My mother would pause in the doorway of the 2nd bedroom and stand there with a measuring expression. Not quite a smile, something more like assessment. Lydia walked the property line once while I was inside making lunch. And when I asked her what she was doing, she said she was just getting some air. My neighbor, Eleanor Rowan, is 73 years old, a retired school teacher who has lived on the adjacent property for 22 years. She baked me a pie the week I moved in. She has a voice like a bassoon and an absolute commitment to truth. In March, she called me. "Someone's been asking questions," she said 3 times in 2 weeks. A woman with blonde highlights, very friendly, asking the neighbors how you are, whether you travel a lot, whether the cabin is used as a rental. What did you tell her? I told her I was calling you. My hands went cold. I sat with the phone for a long moment. That's my sister, I said. I thought it might be. I called Lydia. She laughed it off. I was just curious about your neighborhood, she said. God, you're so paranoid. I called my mother. She didn't answer. I sat in my living room that night and stared at the fireplace and told myself I was overreacting. I told myself my family was messy and dramatic, but not calculating, not deliberate. I was wrong. In April, my father called and said something I didn't register as important until weeks later. You know that creek property he said you should look into whether it could be subdivided? I'm not subdividing my property, Dad. Just saying could be worth a second structure depending on the zoning. I thought he was making conversation. I was wrong about that too. I found out later from a records request I submitted in October that in May, someone had called the Netherlands Planning Department about zoning variances on my property. The address was mine. The caller did not leave a name. I have a very good guess. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in September. I was in a meeting with my project manager reviewing load calculations for a bridge replacement on Highway 119 when my phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then rang outright. Mrs. Rowan. I excused myself. Mara. Her voice was barely a whisper. There's a moving truck in your driveway. A big one, white. Your family is here. Your mother, your father, your sister, the children, they're carrying boxes inside. One of the men said they were moving in. A pause. They said you knew. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I said call 911 if they break anything, and I drove. The drive from Boulder to Netherlands is 45 minutes on a good day. I did it in 32. I don't remember most of it. I remember the way my hands looked on the steering wheel, knuckles, white tendons visible, and I remember thinking with strange clinical clarity, they planned this. This is not impulsive. This was planned. When I crested the hill and saw my property, my vision went strange around the edges. My mother was standing in my driveway directing two men I'd never seen into my house with a box spring. She was using her hands the way she did when she was in charge. Little conductor's gestures efficient and satisfied. My father leaned against the moving truck with his arms crossed, watching. Lydia was hauling a box through my front door with her shoulder. Bored expression, door open. Just open like it was hers. Owen and Piper were chasing each other through my pine trees. I parked and got out. My legs worked mechanically. My mother saw me first. Perfect timing, she called, actually waving. We need help with the heavy stuff. I walked toward her and I kept my voice as level as I could. What are you doing? It wasn't a question. She took it as one. She smiled that particular smile she's used my whole life that means you're being difficult and adorable about it. And she said, we're moving in, sweetheart. Your sister needs space. This is family property. Family property. I looked at my house. I looked at the two strangers carrying my sister's mattress through my front door. You gave me $1,000, I said 3 years ago. Money is money, she said. Don't be petty about it. Lydia pushed through the front door, turned, and tossed over her shoulder. The key was under the planter, by the way. You really should hide it better. Then Owen came flying across the yard, sandy hair everywhere, and grabbed my arm. Grandma says I get the room with the big window. She says you won't mind. She had told the children. She had sat down with a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and told them which room they were getting. She had made it real for them. She had made it home for them before I could say a single word. That was the moment I stopped being someone who caved. I walked inside, stepped over a box in my own hallway, locked myself in my home office, and made 2 calls. The first was to Randall's locksmith in Netherlands. A man named Randall actually answered, which felt like a miracle. How fast can you get to me? I asked. 2 hours. I'll pay double for one. See you in 50 minutes. The second call was to the Boulder County Sheriff's Department. I was transferred twice before I reached someone who could help me. Deputy Aaron Hartman, 8 years on the force, a voice like gravel and efficiency. I told him what was happening. He listened without interrupting, which I appreciated more than I can explain. Are they on the deed? He asked. No. Do they have any documentation? Lease, legal agreement, anything in writing? No. Have they established residency beds, set up food in the kitchen, personal items? I looked at my door. Through it, I could hear the sounds of furniture being moved. They're working on it, I said. There was a pause. I need to tell you something important, he said, and his tone shifted in a way that made my stomach drop. Colorado eviction law. If they establish residency mattresses, clothing, food, it becomes complicated. They'd have tenant rights. Removal would require a formal eviction process, which can take 60 to 90 days. 60 to 90 days. My family in my house for 60 to 90 days because I hadn't come home fast enough. Get here, I said, please. I'm 20 minutes out. Don't confront them alone. Here's what I did in those 20 minutes. I came out of my office. I walked to the back door, the side door, and the door to the basement, and I locked every deadbolt. I pulled shut every window on the ground floor and latched them. My neighbor, Walter, 61, retired contractor, had installed a second set of interior slide bolts on all my exterior doors 2 winters ago after a break-in 2 miles up the road. I had thought he was being excessive. I slid every single one. Then I walked to the front door where one of the movers was trying to bring in a second mattress, and I blocked it. "Stop," I said. He looked at me. "This is my house," I said. "Put it back in the truck." My mother appeared behind him. "Mara, stop being dramatic." "Stop," I said, again, just to her this time. She looked at my face, and for 1 second she faltered. I used that second. I stepped outside, closed the front door behind me, and locked it. She found her voice again fast. It went from sweet to vicious in the time it took her to blink. "Open this door right now, Mara. We have mattresses out here. It's getting dark. You are embarrassing us," Lydia shrieked in front of the movers. My father walked up last, and his voice was quiet, which was always the worst. Quiet meant he thought he already knew the outcome. "She'll cave," he said to my mother, not to me. She always does. I sat down on the floor of my own entryway, back against the door phone in my hand, and called the sheriff's department back. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. My hands shook, yes. My chest felt like something had been removed from it, but I did not cry because there was no time for it, and because some part of me finally was not sad. Some part of me was ready. Deputy Hartman arrived 19 minutes later. He was taller than his voice, 6'2", methodical, the kind of person who assesses a situation by going quiet rather than louder. I met him on the porch with the folder. I had been building that folder for 8 months without knowing why. Mortgage documents, the deed. Property tax statements, insurance records, the purchase agreement. I had them in a manila folder in my filing cabinet because I am a civil engineer, and I understand that documentation is the difference between a load-bearing wall and a suggestion. Hartman read everything. He asked me 3 questions. He looked at my mother, who was standing in my driveway with her arms crossed and her chin raised, and he said, "Do you live here?" She drew herself up. "We're moving in. This is a family property. Do you live here?" Silence. "Do you have documentation proving ownership or any legal agreement granting you right of residency?" She opened her mouth, closed it. Hartman turned to me, handed back my folder, and said flatly, "This is her legal residence. You've been asked to leave multiple times. If you attempt entry, it becomes breaking and entering." Lydia started crying. Owen started crying because Lydia did. Mom pointed at me with a shaking finger. "You will regret this," she said. "You will be sorry for this for the rest of your life." They loaded everything back into the moving truck while Hartman and his partner, Deputy Chen, 6 years on the force, watched from the driveway. It took 40 minutes. My father drove past me, last window down. "This isn't over," he said. He drove away. I stood in my yard in the dark and listened to the creak. He was right. It wasn't over. 3 days later, I came home from work to find fresh gouge marks around my back door lock. Deep ones, like someone had used a pry bar. The door had held those interior slide bolts again, but the frame showed the marks. Mrs. Rowan had seen everything. She'd been on her porch with her evening tea, she told me, and she'd seen Lydia's minivan parked at the bottom of my access road at 2:15 in the afternoon. She saw 2 people approach my property from the tree line rather than the driveway. One of them, she said, was definitely Lydia. The other was male, heavy-set, early 30s. She had taken photos on her Samsung Galaxy. I stared at those photos for a long time. Then I called Margaret Aussie. Margaret Aussie JD is a Boulder-based attorney specializing in property and real estate law, 16 years of practice. She has a framed copy of the Colorado Revised Statutes Title 38 on her wall, and she talks like every word is billing time, which I respected completely. I showed her the photos, I showed her the door, I showed her my folder. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "I want you to understand what they were attempting. Adverse possession in Colorado requires, among other things, open, notorious, and continuous use. What they tried on September 14th was establishing residency under the assumption you wouldn't act fast enough to stop it. When that failed, they moved to forced entry. This is not a family dispute, Ms. Lane. This is a pattern of illegal conduct. What can I do? File criminal mischief charges for the lock tampering. Apply for a civil protection order, not a domestic violence order. a property-based civil protection order under CRS 13-14-104-5, which will prohibit them from approaching your property, and document every single incident from this point forward. What about my niece and nephew? She paused. What about them? I don't want them used as justification. My mother's already told people I abandoned the family, left the children with nowhere to go. Is there any genuine risk to the children? No, they have a home. Lydia's lease isn't up until January. Then the narrative doesn't hold. I'd suggest a brief factual statement to anyone who's been told otherwise. I already knew who had been told. Mrs. Rowan had mentioned it. My mother had spent 3 visits telling the neighbors that I'd offered to share the cabin, then changed my mind when it was too late to make other arrangements. She had spent weeks building a story in the community before I could contradict it. My mother understood on a deep and intuitive level that reputation is infrastructure. You build it before you need it. So did I. On September 21st, I filed a criminal mischief report with the Boulder County Sheriff. Deputy Hartman took the statement himself. On September 22nd, Margaret Ossie filed for the civil protection order. The hearing was set for October 9th. On September 23rd, I sent a certified letter to my parents' address and to Lydia's apartment. The letter drafted by Ossie stated clearly the property at 4812 Creekside Road, Nederland, Colorado was solely and exclusively the property of Mara J. Lane. Any attempt to enter, claim, or encumber said property without legal authorization would result in criminal trespass charges. All future communication regarding the property was to go through counsel. My mother called 47 times in 2 days. I know this because I counted before I blocked the number. Lydia texted me a photograph of Owen asleep with the caption, "He cries for you. He doesn't understand why his aunt abandoned him." I screenshot it. I sent it to Ossie. She added it to the file. The protection order hearing was in a wood-paneled room in Boulder on a Thursday morning. My mother came with a handwritten timeline. Lydia came with Owen and Piper. The children sat in the hallway with a woman from Lydia's church. The judge was the Honorable Patricia Fenn, 24 years on the bench, a face that had heard every story ever told, and had decided somewhere along the way to simply look at paper instead. My mother presented her case. She spoke for 11 minutes. She said I had verbally agreed to let the family stay. She said I had led them to believe the cabin was available. She said she'd spent her savings on the moving truck, $2,300, she said, based on my assurances. Judge Fenn listened, then she looked at my documentation. Deed, mortgage, property tax, the certified letters, the locksmith receipt dated the day of the attempted move-in, Mrs. Rowan's affidavit. 2 pages, single-spaced, signed and notarized the photo of the gouge marks around the back door lock. The criminal mischief report, the voicemail I had saved from my mother from the night of September 14th, in which she said clearly and without ambiguity, "We knew you'd fight us on this. That's why we planned it for when you were at work. This is bigger than your feelings, Mara." I had that voicemail on a recorder in my pocket. When Asa played it through the courtroom speaker, the room went absolutely still. My mother's attorney, a man named Fisher, who had the energy of someone regretting a professional decision in real time, said nothing. Judge Fenn looked over her glasses at my mother. "You've stated that your daughter verbally agreed to this arrangement." My mother nodded. "And yet you also left a voicemail acknowledging that you scheduled the move for when she was at work because you anticipated her resistance." Silence. Those 2 things, Judge Fenn said, cannot both be true. She granted the protection order. Full property protection, 500 feet, all members of the immediate family for 18 months. She also issued a formal note recommending the criminal mischief matter proceed given the evidence of attempted forced entry. My father, who had sat in the back of the courtroom without speaking, walked out without looking at me. Lydia gathered the kids in the hallway, and I heard through the open door Piper say, "Mama, is Aunt Mara in trouble?" And Lydia said, "Don't worry about it." The community part came later, and it was in some ways the hardest. My mother had done her work well. 4 of my 5 neighbors had a version of the story, the version where I had promised something and then withdrawn it, where the grandchildren were caught in my selfishness, where family loyalty had been sacrificed on the altar of my pride. I went door to door. I want to be honest about what that felt like. Humiliating. I am a private person. I have always believed that what happens inside a family should stay inside it. But my mother had already decided to make our conflict a public document. She just thought she'd get to control the narrative. I brought a single sheet of paper to each neighbor. Deed protection order, no emotional appeal, no defensive posturing, no drama. Just here is what is true, and here is what has been documented by a court. Tom, a retired electrician who'd been told I left the kids with nowhere to go, read the paper twice. Her exact kids are fine, I told him. Lydia's lease runs through January. The children are not at risk. He handed the paper back and said, "That took guts." Walter, who'd installed my interior bolts, didn't need convincing. He'd seen the gouge marks before I had. He shook my hand at the door. Mrs. Rowan, when I came to thank her for the affidavit, held my face in both hands and said, "You are not the problem. You have never been the problem." I almost lost it then. I held it together until I got back to my car. The criminal mischief charge moved slowly, as these things do. A detective from the Property Crimes Unit, Detective Rosa Palacios, 11 years, in the kind of professional who schedules follow-ups before you have to ask, confirmed the door damage was consistent with a pry bar. She found fibers in the door frame. She found a partial boot print in the soft soil below the back step. In November, Lydia's boyfriend, the heavy-set early 30s man in Mrs. Rowan's photographs, was identified through social media. His name was Kyle Brett. He had a prior charge for criminal trespass in El Paso County 3 years ago, which made the current situation significantly less ambiguous to the DA. Kyle Brett pled down to criminal mischief class 2 misdemeanor with a $750 fine and 18 months probation. Lydia was not charged. There wasn't enough to charge her directly, and I wasn't certain I wanted to. She had 2 children who were not responsible for any of this. My parents were not charged. The voicemail was evidence of intent, but not action. The law is specific, but the protection order stood. Here is what happened in the months after. My sister found a 3-bedroom apartment in Colorado Springs, cheaper than her old place, quieter neighborhood, better school district. I know this because Owen called me in December from a number I didn't recognize and said, voice formal and careful, the way kids get when they're trying to be grown. "Grandma says we can't talk to you," but I wanted to say Merry Christmas. "Merry Christmas, buddy," I said. "Are you mad at us?" "Never," I said, not even a little bit. He hung up fast, like he was afraid of getting caught. My chest did something complicated that I decided to just feel instead of name. My parents went quiet in a way I'd never experienced from them. Not the silence of retreat, the silence of people regrouping. My mother posted 2 things on Facebook about children who abandon their families and bloodlines that run cold, then apparently was talked out of continuing by someone in her friend group with better judgment. The post came down after 4 days. My father called me once in February. He said, "I hope you're satisfied." I said, "I'm working on it." He hung up. The cabin is quiet in winter. That's the thing I love most about it. The creek ices over and makes these low cracking sounds at night that used to unsettle me and now feel like company. I replaced the back door frame entirely. New lock, new hardware, new deadbolt. Walter helped. We did it on a Saturday and he wouldn't let me pay him. So I made chili and we ate on the porch in November coats and watched the light go off the mountains. I started seeing a therapist in October. Dr. Anita Vora, 12 years in practice, specializing in family systems, in what she calls the specific grief of kin estrangement. In our 3rd session, she said something that unlocked something in me. "You didn't lose your family on September 14th. You've been losing them for 30 years. September 14th is just when you found out." I sat with that for a long time. She's right. I know she's right. The cabin, the creek, the property, none of that was really the point. The point was that I had built something slowly and quietly and entirely on my own. And the people who were supposed to love me looked at it and thought, ours. They had never seen me. They had only ever seen what I could provide. When you understand that about someone, really understand it, the way you understand a load calculation or a stress test with the evidence laid out in front of you in black and white, you can't unknow it. The protection order expired after 18 months. I didn't renew it, not because I forgave everything, not because the door had healed or the boot print had been erased or the voicemail had stopped existing, but because I had spent enough of my attention on people who had spent none of theirs on me. The order had done its job. My house was mine. My name was on the deed. My creek froze every January and thawed every April and ran clear over rocks that had been there 10,000 years before any of us arrived to argue about who they belonged to. I go to work. I come home. I make coffee on the porch, on mornings when it's still dark, and I watch the pine trees come clear in the light, and I don't owe that moment to a single person on earth. That's not coldness. That's what it feels like to finally live somewhere nobody can take from you. My mother said I would regret this for the rest of my life. About that sometimes when the coffee's hot and the light is good, and the creek is doing its thing down in the valley. I'm still waiting for the regret to show up. It hasn't yet.